Kaliningrad is supposed to be Russia's ace in the hole, the small scrap of territory that gives Russia a presence deep enough in Europe that it can be used to threaten the entire Eastern Front, including Poland and the Baltic nations. But there's a problem with running an exclave. Isolation is the downfall. NATO just delivered that message right to Putin's doorstep with a flexing of muscles so powerful that it would have made Arnold Schwarzenegger proud. Russia just collectively wet its pants as NATO has revealed that the Kaliningrad stronghold might not be so strong after all. On August 18th, NATO conducted a planned air exercise over Poland, right next to Poland's border with Kaliningrad. Most of the exercise was focused on Poland's northeast, where that border lies, and it included an assembly of air power that would have sent shivers through the Kremlin's spine. Up to 50 aircraft converged on this one spot in an exercise that Poland says was intended to practice joint air operations scenarios and strengthen interoperability between NATO partners. This exercise, though planned in advance, also seems to have been almost deliberately timed to send a message to Russia. It comes off the back of a report in the German newspaper Bild, which suggested that NATO is developing what it calls a land warfighting concept that would exist to respond to a Russian attack on the Baltic states, perhaps emanating from Kaliningrad. This concept would be a contingency plan, Liga explains, adding that the document revealing the plan has been drafted under the direction of US Major Andrew Pingray, and it outlines how NATO could respond in the event of an invasion that includes drones and missiles to start, followed by a ground invasion using armored vehicles. Kaliningrad would be a priority target under this plan. The latest NATO exercise also comes on the back of the large-scale war games that NATO held back in May. Also taking place in Poland, these exercises, which were codenamed Amber Shock 26, involved more than 3,500 soldiers and hundreds of military vehicles from several NATO countries. Those drills were also part of the wider Sabre Strike 26 exercise, which took place in Poland, Finland and Lithuania, all with the intention of NATO figuring out how to move troops quickly across these regions. NATO doesn't need to tell anybody why these troops would need to move so fast. This was yet another exercise, again held near Kaliningrad, designed to prepare for a potential Russian invasion. Wet patches are appearing on Kremlin pants as we speak, and they should be, as NATO's latest exercise, along with everything that came in the months before, sends a very clear message that Kaliningrad is in NATO's sights. This exclave, which is meant to be a strategic asset to Russia, is being exposed as a potential weak point that is very vulnerable to the sheer scale of firepower that NATO can unleash. There are all sorts of reasons why Kaliningrad is so weak right now that we'll be getting to. But before we do, let's dig a little deeper into the exercise itself. We told you that up to 50 aircraft were involved, but there's a lot more to it than that. The air package that NATO sent into Poland was unusually large, and it contained some aircraft that aren't typically seen in aerial exercises carried out near Kaliningrad. Among those aircraft were assets capable of conducting combat strikes as well as electronic warfare, air surveillance and aerial refueling. The spokesperson for Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, Colonel Martin O'Donnell, revealed a little more, noting that the August 18th training included fighter aircraft from the US and Norway, as well as a NATO E-3A AWACS or Airborne Warning and Control System plane, as well as Polish ground troops. We start to get a little bit of a picture of the exercise from this description alone. The AWACS likely acted as an aerial command center and radar station, feeding information to other airframes and troops on the ground as part of the operation. Beyond the size of the air package, NATO's exercise was also notable for its complexity, reports Itamil Radar. The diversity on display in terms of various aerial platforms all being active simultaneously is something that we rarely see in these types of exercises, and the fact that these airframes came from several different countries added another layer of complexity. The presence of several aerial refueling tankers amounting to a pair of NATO A330 MRTTs also indicates that NATO's goal in this exercise was to ensure its aircraft could stay airborne for an extended period, allowing fighter jets and bombers to operate further from their home bases. Perhaps those attacking craft will be flying from Europe to Poland, where they refuel, and then on to Kaliningrad. NATO hasn't said as much, but it will be very happy to keep Russia guessing. Another interesting aspect of the exercise was the deployment of the EA-37B Compass Corps. According to United 24 Media, an analyst from OSINT Defender has pointed out that several of the aircraft used in the exercise aren't exactly uncommon sights during exercises that take place in Poland, but the EA-37B is different. The deployment of that plane seems to be brand new, and it suggests that this exercise might not just have been about encouraging interoperability as Poland claims it to be. The EA-37B is an electronic warfare aircraft that is also capable of gathering intelligence, meaning that NATO may have been experimenting with how it could disable Kaliningrad's defenses and hamper missiles and drones fired from the Exclave in the future. The EA-37B Compass Call is a very interesting aircraft. According to Air Force technology, the initial operating capability of this airframe is expected to be achieved at some point in 2026. Given that it was just flying in Poland, we think it's safe to say that this aircraft is now operational and ready to be deployed. The EA-37B is operated by the US Air Force, and its design is based on the Gulfstream G550 commercial business jet. However, its looks aren't as important as what it does. The EA-37B is intended to be a replacement for the EC-130H Compass Call, which the US Air Force has operated since 1982, and it provides standoff jamming capabilities. Again, that suggests a potential use when dealing with Kaliningrad, likely in terms of misdirecting drones and missiles fired from the Exclave. With its flight ceiling of over 13,700 meters and a top speed of Mach 0.82, the aircraft is also capable of evading air defenses and perhaps even using its electronic warfare capabilities to interfere with those defenses, thus offering key support to attacking aircraft. The aircraft is also believed to be capable of conducting counter-information operations, suggesting it could be capable of interfering with devices used by Russia to spread misinformation. All told, it's a very interesting addition to the threat package that NATO clearly has developed to deal with the Kaliningrad problem. And that brings us nicely to why NATO held its exercise at all, and what that Kaliningrad problem really means in the wider scope of Russia's ambitions for Europe. But before we go deeper into these issues, this is the Military Show. If this is the kind of insight you want to see, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications enabled so you don't miss any of our daily videos. So what was this exercise really all about? The explanation varies depending on who you ask. According to Itamil Radar, the most interesting thing about the exercise was the sheer scale of it all. NATO running drills in Poland and near Kaliningrad is nothing new. We even detailed another exercise that took place earlier in 2026, just a few minutes ago. However, it's the combination of capabilities presented here that is remarkable. What NATO has just pulled off is an exercise involving E-3As, which offer wide command and control functions, fighter jets, which would clearly go on the attack against border threats, i.e. Kaliningrad, and electronic warfare capabilities that haven't been seen in this kind of exercise before. Aerial refueling tankers also playing a role suggests that NATO is readying itself for a sustained aerial campaign against Kaliningrad, perhaps with the intention of shutting the Exclave down fast and early should a war break out with Russia. The point is that this wasn't just a collection of unrelated sorties. It was a complete operational package very purposefully deployed into northern Poland to send a message to Russia about just how screwed Kaliningrad would be if NATO went on the attack. Remember those wet patches in the Kremlin pants we mentioned? This message is why they've appeared. However, officially, this isn't what the exercise was about. Poland's operational command, which was heavily involved, claims that this was an exercise coordinated by NATO and completely unrelated to any Russian Air Force activity. That's a nod to a flurry of incidents involving Russia and Poland that we'll get to soon. Rather, the operation had nothing to do with Russia at all. It was about strengthening cooperation between NATO allied forces. That's the official line, sure, but we don't think anybody really believes it, even if these exercises were planned weeks or months in advance. And to add an extra wrinkle to proceedings, Stars and Stripes claims that US officials say that this exercise was really about deterrence. And right now there is only one power in Europe that needs to be deterred: Russia. The US involvement in this exercise comes on the back of that flurry of Polish activity we mentioned. On August 6th, the Wall Street Journal reported that US intelligence is suggesting that Russia may soon attempt to test NATO's resolve with some sort of limited incursion. In the past, this type of activity was thought unlikely due to the Ukraine invasion. But as Putin feels the squeeze from that invasion not going Russia's way, he gets desperate. And that desperation could lead to him expanding the conflict, be that through increased hybrid warfare activity or even a limited ground invasion, such as occupying border territory in a Baltic state. Either way, something is coming, the US claims. And this report gains credibility because it came on the back of a July 3rd claim by US intelligence that Russia was planning some sort of attack on Poland, again as a test of NATO resolve. What happened just a few weeks after that report? Russia sent a missile into Polish territory. At the end of July, a Russian Kh-101 missile crossed the border shared by Ukraine and Poland. It then flew 90 kilometers deep into Poland, shadowed by aircraft practically the entire way, before crashing down and exploding in an empty field. Russia, of course, claims no responsibility. It was all just an accident. And the missile must have ended up going off course. The incident happened during a large Russian aerial assault against Ukraine that involved 74 missiles and 284 Shahed-type drones. Poland's Deputy Defense Minister, Cezary Tomczyk, was forthright in calling out the incident for what it really was. It was a provocation, an intention, an alliance test. In this case, the next weeks will probably give us more answers. Let's not have any illusions. This type of situation or such provocations will happen, Tomczyk declared on July 31st. He added that around 20 of Russia's missiles were heading in Poland's direction, but were shot down by Ukraine's air defenses, meaning the incursion could have been even worse. The timing all lines up. The US said that Russia was planning something in Poland, and something happened less than a month later. Now the US says that Russia has some other incursion planned. NATO needs to be prepared, and an operation designed to show Russia just how quickly Kaliningrad would be attacked may be the best way to show Putin that NATO is ready. There's more to the deterrent angle too. Unmasking Russia points out that Russia has been making some strange naval movements in the Baltic region. In particular, one of Russia's most advanced warships, the Admiral Kasatonov, was seen passing by Fehmarn, which is a German island, as it made its way out of Baltic waters. This is a dangerous ship. The Admiral Kasatonov is capable of launching Zircon missiles, which are nuclear-capable and travel at hypersonic speeds. Other Russian warships have also been spotted making strange moves near Fehmarn in recent weeks, including the Admiral Yevchenko. And on top of all of that, Putin, in a frothing rage over Western interceptions of Russian Shadow Fleet vessels, has threatened that Russia will soon retaliate by seizing European ships. Perhaps that explains why Russian warships are suddenly so active in the Baltic region. So again, NATO needed to send a message. Not just for Poland, but for the Baltic states and any European nation that is threatened by Putin. As Bundeswehr University military expert Carlo Massala puts it, one can only hope that Russia understood the message. Back off now, or Kaliningrad gets it. That brings us nicely back to the location that NATO chose to carry out its exercise. So many aircraft and ground forces operating in northern Poland is no coincidence. Kaliningrad is the target, and there are plenty of reasons why NATO is looking to use this particular Russian exclave as a pressure point against Putin. There is what Kaliningrad is supposed to be and what it actually is to consider. For Russia, Kaliningrad is supposed to be both a stronghold and an ever-present threat that Russia can use to intimidate the nations that make up NATO's eastern flank. To bolster that threat, Russia houses air defense systems, missile complexes, and a host of military infrastructure in the exclave, in addition to using it to support Russia's Baltic fleet. According to CNA, this use of Kaliningrad is fairly recent. Through the 1990s and up to early 2016, Kaliningrad hosted military forces, but they were relatively weak. It wasn't until 2021, on the eve of the Ukraine invasion, that Putin decided he needed to beef up the exclave. Missiles, armored vehicles, warships, and troops all made their way into Kaliningrad. On the troop side of things, Russia deployed the 11th Army Corps, containing up to 18,000 soldiers, and there may be more besides. The Baltic fleet that Kaliningrad supports is also dangerous, containing 52 surface ships, some of which are among the most advanced in Russia's navy, as well as a Kilo-class submarine. Kaliningrad is also located close to the Suwalki Gap, which is a 65-kilometer stretch of land that cuts through the Polish and Lithuanian border, connecting to Belarus. Everything we've just shared is supposed to ensure that NATO, and particularly the eastern flank, is scared of Kaliningrad. But as we said, there is a difference between how Russia tries to present Kaliningrad and what it actually represents at play. And what Kaliningrad actually represents, which becomes clearer with every passing day that Russia fails in the Ukraine war, is a strategic weak link for Russia. Isolation is a problem. Though connected to Russia via Baltic waters, Kaliningrad is located about 360 kilometers away from the Russian mainland. Not ideal for Russia if it ends up in a fight where it needs to keep Kaliningrad supplied, and it's cut off by a Baltic blockade and NATO troops on the eastern flank. Kaliningrad's weakness is also demonstrated by its reliance on Russian subsidies to survive, even when the exclave isn't actively involved in a conflict. In December 2025, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine revealed that Russian authorities were planning to allocate about $60 million to seaborne transport, all to support Kaliningrad. Cut off as it is, Kaliningrad is ripe for issues related to inflation, as store prices rocket up when supply issues arise. All of this is important in the context of NATO's latest exercise, because it reveals that Kaliningrad isn't the stronghold Russia wants it to be. Yes, weapons may be hosted there, but stranded hundreds of kilometers away from Russia and surrounded on all sides by NATO nations, Kaliningrad is ripe to be the very first piece of Russian territory that Putin loses if he starts a war with NATO. And for Putin, any loss of territory is a humiliation that would make it harder for him to justify an already insane war to the Russian people. Up to 50 aircraft involved in one of NATO's most complex drills yet sends a message. It also reinforces a message that NATO has sent before, which is that Kaliningrad is vulnerable. Back in July 2025, US Army Europe and Africa Commander General Chris Donahue said that NATO forces would be able to capture Kaliningrad in a time frame that is unheard of. The implication is that a combination of aerial bombardment and ground forces heading into the Exclave would take Kaliningrad down from the ground, faster than ever thought possible. It just so happens that the latest NATO exercise involved aerial power and ground forces, all converged right on Kaliningrad's doorstep. The former commanding general of US Army Europe, Ben Hodges, doubled down on this claim a few months later, stating that the likes of Kaliningrad and places like Sevastopol in the Crimean Peninsula would be eliminated in the first hours of a war between NATO and Russia. And Russia wouldn't be able to do anything about it, due to Kaliningrad being isolated and because Russia's economy has been weakened to the point where it can't support Kaliningrad anywhere near enough for the Exclave to serve as the fortress that Putin wants it to be. So when NATO flexes its muscles close to Kaliningrad, it's not acting like a gym bro who has fallen in love with the nearest mirror. There is purpose behind the exercise. What just happened in Poland is the proof that backs all of these claims of Kaliningrad's weakness. It's NATO showing Russia that the organization has the ability to amass a varied array of air power, all of which can coordinate to destroy a target in record time. The implied target was Kaliningrad. If Russia is going to provoke NATO allies, NATO is going to make sure that Putin and the Kremlin know just how quickly Russia's vulnerable exclave will fall. And as NATO flexes, terrifying everybody in the Kremlin, Ukraine strikes. Exacerbating the economic problems that have left Kaliningrad so weak is a relentless Ukrainian campaign against Russian oil refining that has left Russia begging for help from its neighbors. Find out more about the impact of that deep strike strategy in our video. But before you go, everything you see here is researched, verified, and produced by real people. If you value that, subscribe, comment below, and consider becoming a member for access to exclusive content. And thank you, as always, for watching.